All right, so it's good to see everyone, and thank you all for your patience as every Sunday from September through October was either a Jewish holiday or something else was going in my personal life or in the community. Like last week, I was in New Jersey for a wedding that I had to attend. And anyway, so now we're on for a while until Thanksgiving weekend. I think that'll be the first Sunday now that we won't have a class. And then there'll be a Sunday, there'll be a couple Sundays in December, but I'll send you a reminder about that. So anyway, it's good to see everybody again. I'm going to mute all and feel free to interrupt at any time with a question or comment. And I'm going to share my screen and with the text. There we go. And there we go. And okay, so the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we had agreed last time in September, maybe everybody's wishes are different, but now that it's 2 months ago, we had agreed that we'll just keep on going from where we left off. So I want to summarize chapter 1 of Avodah Zarah, which was the tractate that we were discussing and studying about relationship with the non-Jews around us, just how we learn about rabbinic times, what the relationship was, and how that impacts our relationship with non-Jewish people today. So here's the summary of chapter 1 that we had studied. Conducting business with Gentiles is prohibited on the 3 days preceding their pagan festival, as well as on the day of the festival itself. The Gemara concludes that the prohibition against conducting business before the festival applies only in Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. In addition to the prohibition against conducting business, it's also prohibited to borrow money, lend money, or repay a debt on these days, unless the Jew will thereby suffer financial loss, or if not doing so, will cause hatred of Jews. Okay, so in other words, we're not supposed to make the Gentiles happy by doing business with them.
You're muted, Rabbi.
I'm really sorry. I don't know what happened. I thought I was connected to the internet, and okay.
The gremlins are out today.
They they are. Okay, let's try this sharing screen again. Here we go. Okay. Okay, so I think we're okay. I switched the internet that I'm connected to, so hopefully this will work better. So the first chapter of Avodah Zarah is about our relationship with non-Jews and how we're not supposed to be seen in any way as helping non-Jews celebrate their holidays. And we have to remember that non-Jews in the time of the rabbis and in the time of the Bible means specifically idolaters. Okay, so some of the laws that we learn in Avodah Zarah may not apply today because there are no idolaters today. Now that gets to a bigger question, by the way. You know, what do secular people worship? And what are the ideals that people are chasing? So some people could say that the misinformation that's out there in social media world and the conspiracy theories and people who follow those could be seen as idolaters today. Just makes for an interesting conversation about that, and that perhaps supporting social media or supporting these conspiracy theories could in a way be avodah zarah, idolatry today. All right, so that we can keep that in mind as we discuss this. So just going on with this summary here, anything that will make a non-Jew happy related to their festival celebration, we're not supposed to have anything to do with, and we're supposed to stay far away from. It's not only prohibited to conduct business on the day of the pagan festivals, but one also may not do so at fairs held in honor of idol worship. This is because proceeds from the fair are used to support idol worship, and furthermore, the Jew would be profiting from money that is associated with idol worship. Therefore, if a Jew does conduct business at one of these events, he's not permitted to derive benefit from the money. The Gemara explains that a Jew must refrain from participating in events held in honor of idolatry, even if they are only social events. It's therefore prohibited to travel and enter a city where such an event is taking place. Similarly, a Jew may not give or accept gifts from a Gentile on the day of his festival unless there is concern that one's refusal will result in hatred, right? So we have to balance, and that's from earlier in this summary too. We have to balance not wanting to encourage idolatrous celebration with our safety. So if refusal to participate or refusal to sell or refusal to just be in the place where a celebration is going on could endanger our lives personally or the life of the Jewish community there, then the life, your personal life, the Jewish community life takes precedence. So, if the coronation of the king or queen, which involves idol worship, takes place and requires everyone to attend on threat of imprisonment or worse, then clearly you have to do it. Okay, so the Mishnah lists various pagan festivals to which this prohibition applies. These include festivals that are clearly pagan in nature, as well as royal festivals that included elements of pagan rituals and rites. This chapter primarily addresses festivals held in the Roman Empire, but it also mentions Babylonian and Persian festivals. In addition, it's established that in the case of a festival of an individual or a festival that is conducted in a specific place, the prohibition against conducting business applies only to those celebrating the festival, and it applies only on the day of the festival itself. Throughout the year, it's prohibited to sell to Gentile items that will be used for idol worship. Therefore, if an item is commonly, so this is all festival days. Now these are anything related to idol worship itself. So a Jew shouldn't be, let's say Christmas trees were seen to be pagan items of worship, then Jews shouldn't be involved in cutting down or selling Christmas trees. Therefore, if an item is commonly used in idol worship, or if the Gentile states explicitly that his intention is to use an article or animal for that purpose, the sale is prohibited. In a case where the item is commonly used for idol worship, there are times when it's permitted to sell it. For example, if it's clear either due to the identity of the buyer or by virtue of the number of items sold that it will not be used for idol worship. The chapter further taught that it's prohibited for a Jew to build a structure that will be used for idol worship. Despite all the above, the accepted custom throughout the generations has been to permit business transactions with Gentiles even on their festival days. The reasons for this leniency, which can be tracked back to the Gemara, include the fact that the Gentiles with whom the Jews come in contact are no longer pagans, a fear of instigating hatred against Jews, and the difficult situations in which the Jews find themselves. Okay, so in other words, selling Christmas trees would be okay, because Christianity clearly is not paganism, it's not idolatry, and engaging in business around Christmas does not apply to these prohibitions. Okay, and there are the other bigger issues at stake in terms of our relationship and our standing in the community, our relationship with non-Jews and our standing in the community. Unless we live in Muncie or in Borough Park or in Israel, it's very hard to make a living just by dealing with and doing business with Jews only. All right. So, I tell you, my daughter and son-in-law live in White Plains, just over the Tappan Zee, which is now the Mario Cuomo Bridge, from my son-in-law's parents and family in Rockland County. Rockland County is like a whole other Jewish world from here, in that there's a kosher market there that is the size of Wegmans. And I haven't been in Wegmans, but I only know how big it is from what people are saying. Imagine Wegmans as a an exclusively kosher market, where everything in the store is 100% certified kosher. And you have an extensive takeout counter, an extensive bakery, dairy department, deli department. This is a store called Evergreen. And it's almost worth it to travel the 4 hours just to see what Evergreen looks like. And that's just the store. And then I know that all around in Rockland County are places where you have pockets of ultra-Orthodox Jews. So you can, if you live in the ultra-Orthodox community and are ultra-Orthodox, you can get by and make a living just by doing business with ultra-Orthodox Jews. But I'm saying in America, it's Rockland County and Borough Park. That is really the only places where you can avoid non-Jews altogether. And you can even work the system, the non-Jewish governmental system, to your advantage, as Kiryas Yoel and a couple other communities in Rockland County have done with the state of New York in terms of taxes, public money for private Jewish institutions. Really quite the mess in Rockland County, and giving us, the Jewish community, a bad name because of what they're doing. Anyway, sorry for the digression. Chapter 1, the summary continues. In addition to the prohibition against selling items to Gentiles that will be used for idol worship, other sales are also prohibited for a variety of reasons. One may not sell large livestock to Gentiles, lest they use livestock that belongs to Jews to perform labor on Shabbat. The only manner in which it's permitted to sell large livestock to Gentiles is if the transaction is conducted through a middleman who buys the livestock from Jews and sells it to Gentiles. It's prohibited to build Jewish structures for Gentiles that might lead to public harm or that may endanger the lives of Jews. Similarly, it's prohibited to sell weapons or dangerous beasts to Gentiles in case they are deployed against Jews. This prohibition is dependent on the circumstance, as it's permitted to sell weapons to Gentiles in locations where they protect Jewish residents. Conversely, it is prohibited to sell weapons to Jews if there is reason to believe that those Jews will use them to harm the public. This also gets to the question, because I'm not sure we talked about this when we actually saw it last year, but it's the question about the state of Israel selling weapons to other governments and to other countries that may not have the best relations with the West, right? So Israel has sold weapons to India. I think they've sold weapons. They've sold weapons to other countries where it's raised an eyebrow as to whether it was appropriate for Israel to be doing that. So it's not about this topic of non-Jews, but it's about protection and being part of the so-called friendly nations, democratic nations, and can you say undemocratic autocratic nations are idolatrous. Be interesting if you can apply these laws to like Russia or North Korea, China, etc. Okay. Another category of prohibited sales to Gentiles applies only to in Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. This prohibition extends to all land and anything that is attached to the ground, provided that it has not been detached. The reason that one may not conduct these sales is because there's a prohibition against letting Gentiles acquire land in Eretz Yisrael. It's also prohibited to rent fields in Eretz Yisrael to Gentiles, as this serves to exclude the land from the mitzvot that apply in Eretz Yisrael. In other words, the land of Israel is holy. So it's designated by God to be a holy land, to be settled by the holy people, which is us. All right, so the way the rabbis are understanding the laws of the Torah, as God is describing it in the Torah, the land of Israel belongs to the Jews. And when we're there in the land of Israel, then it should only be Jewish. And the idea that non-Jews could be having any part of it is traditionally understood as wrong, which gets to the ultra-Orthodox in Israel today really demanding or stating that there shouldn't be churches in the land of Israel, there shouldn't be mosques in the land of Israel. No non-Jewish land, non-Jews should be allowed to own land in Israel. So this is really only the opinion of the ultra-Orthodox. Others understand that it's kind of like a live and let live situation, though, however, there were during the Sukkot holiday, it's a time for some evangelical Christians to make pilgrimage to Israel. I don't know why, but they do. And there were reports in the times of Israel that these groups of Christians walking through the old city were spat upon by very frum religious Jews. So it just it gets to this whole idea stated here that non-Jews don't belong in the holy land of Israel. In any location, it's prohibited to rent a residence to Gentiles, lest he bring an idol into the residence. It's also prohibited to lease property to a Gentile if it will appear to others that the Jew is violating a prohibition when they see the Gentile performing labor on Shabbat. This chapter includes many agadic discussions, that is, folklore discussions, most of which deal with the future day of judgment and the relationship between the Jewish people and the nations of the world throughout the generations. We saw that at the very beginning of the chapter, mostly. These discussions also touch upon various historical events. Okay, so now chapter 2. And today, by the way, the rabbi of the other synagogue in Olney, the conservative synagogue, B'nai Shalom of Olney, is being installed this weekend. There's a whole Shabbat thing, but there's something happening this morning that I have to get to. So we're going to have to end in 20 minutes at 10:10 in order for me to get home, to get Lenore to go to that today. So these are the verses on which chapter 2 is based, right? So always,
Excuse me,
yes, Barbara?
could you make it larger, the print?
Yes.
Thank you.
So the Gemara always likes to know what the Torah verses are from which the Mishnah and the Gemara are interpreting the verse, to derive these laws. Okay, so the discussion of chapter 2 will be based on Leviticus 18, which is the reading for Yom Kippur afternoon, the traditional reading on Yom Kippur afternoon, those sexual relationships that are forbidden. And you shall not lie with any beast to defile yourself with it. Neither shall any woman stand before a beast to lie down with it. It is perversion. Do not defile yourself with any of these things, for in all these the nations are defiled, which I cast out from before you. Which I think means other people do these things. We as Israelites, and by extension as Jews, don't do this. And the word perversion there can also be interpreted and translated as abomination. Okay, so Israelites, Jews are not supposed to do this, but understand that non-Israelites, non-Jews, idolaters do this. Okay, and then Deuteronomy 7, neither shall you make marriages with them. Your daughter you shall not give unto his son, nor his daughter shall you take unto your son, for he will turn away your son from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and he will destroy you quickly. So this is about intermarriage, and our chapter will talk about that too. But Daniel, and this is unusual, that there'll be a verse from other books of the Bible. The verses from the Torah are the most important and the most persuasive for deriving Jewish law. Verses from other books of the Bible, less so. It's important, and more important than the rabbis making it up themselves, but it's less important than Torah verses. So the verse from Daniel, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's food, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the officers that he might not defile himself. So this verse in Daniel being a reference to only drinking Jewish wine and eating Jewish cooked food. Okay, so this chapter will talk about that too. Okay, so yes, I'm not going to talk about it now, but we'll talk about it when we get there. Okay, so this is the preview of chapter 2. Whereas the first chapter of this tractate addressed measures taken to distance Jews from Gentiles in matters of business and commerce in order to avoid indirectly facilitating idolatrous worship, this chapter discusses measures designed to keep Jews from Gentiles on a more personal level. In particular, these measures were taken due to concerns about adultery and murder. Okay, so the chapter 1, Jewish community things to maintain the integrity of the Jewish religion. Now, maintaining our own personal Jewish identification, identity, and integrity. Okay, and so it starts with talking about adultery and murder, but it's going to talk about other things too. The physical aggression, as well as the spiritual and ethical depravity of idolatrous Gentiles living in the Talmudic period, necessitated great caution on the part of Jews, especially those living in areas where law and order were commonly neglected. Consequently, the sages established various ordinances designed to protect their communities by limiting interactions between Jews and Gentiles. This chapter examines the nature of these ordinances, as well as their applications and limitations. Questions as to whether or not a Jew may entrust his life to Gentile professionals, such as physicians, midwives, and wet nurses, are discussed in this chapter. Okay, so that's fascinating too. The chapter also discusses the possibility of aiding idolatrous Gentiles and other malefactors by preventing their demise. Right, so this we wouldn't think of this today, that a Jewish doctor might think about whether it would be appropriate to work on and help somebody not Jewish, let alone somebody, I don't know, let's say Hitler had a Jewish physician. Would have been appropriate for the Jewish physician to have taken care of Hitler. That would be an interesting thing, and there would be more argument for that than a Jewish doctor in Germany working on a regular German who happens to be a member of the Nazi Party, but just a regular German, right? The second part of this chapter deals primarily with various prohibitions instituted by the sages concerning certain foods belonging to Gentiles. These prohibitions can be divided into several categories. Some foods are prohibited due to the possibility that they were involved in an idolatrous ritual, which gets to wine, and we'll talk about that because sometimes the priest would make a libation from the first wine produced from the vineyard, and then so obviously blessing the wine in a non-Jewish way. But then there are other foods too, and are not only and are not prohibited only for consumption, but also for any sort of benefit. The paradigm of these substances is wine, since it was commonly used as libation in idolatrous rituals. There are several questions, primarily with regard to when one must be concerned that a Gentile might have dedicated the wine in his possession or wine belonging to a Jew with which he had contact as an idolatrous libation. Furthermore, it must be established whether wine prohibited due to the possibility that it was used as a libation has the same status as wine that is known to have been used in idolatrous ritual. Issues pertaining to vessels that have come into contact with such wine are considered as well. An additional problem with the consumption of wine is that it causes lightheartedness, and the sages were concerned that consumption of wine in the company of Gentiles could lead to mutual affection and eventual intermarriage. So this gets to the whole question of wine, kosher wine, having the extra status of being mevushal. So if you look on the back of your kosher wine bottle, there is some kosher wine you can buy that is not mevushal, and some that is mevushal. And kosher caterers today, that is, kosher caterers who are certified by the OU or other Orthodox rabbinic authorities, will require that the wine being served at that event be mevushal only. Because for the most part, you have non-Jewish wait staff serving the wine, whether at the bar or at the table that you're sitting at for dinner. And because of this chapter, the non-Jewish waiters are not allowed to serve wine to Jews because of it could lead to mutual affection and eventual intermarriage, which may sound ridiculous to us, right? But that is still applied today. So we know people who have had issues where they wanted a certain kind of wine to be served at their bar mitzvah lunch or their wedding event, and were refused by the caterer to allow it because it wasn't mevushal. And so why is mevushal okay? Because mevushal means essentially pasteurized. So if the wine goes through a pasteurization process, then technically it's not wine anymore, and then it's okay. So some connoisseurs would say that pasteurized wine, and it's like flash pasteurized, affects the taste of the wine. So people, the mavens out there can tell a difference between a pasteurized wine and a non-pasteurized wine. But that flash pasteurization allows then the non-Jewish waitstaff to serve the wine. All right, so when we get there in this chapter, you'll see that it has practical implications for today. This concern also extends to other foods, such as beer and bread, which are also discussed in this context. So you'll notice that some bread that you buy in the kosher market, as opposed to kosher bread that you buy at the Giant, right? And a lot of bread that we buy at the Giant has a kosher certification on it, right? Thomas's English muffins, Arnold's bread, Pepperidge Farm bread, right? All of that's kosher bread. It has an OU or a Kuf K or some other kosher symbol on it. But what this is talking about is an extra category that says in Hebrew. So if you like Greenberg's babka, the chocolate babka or the cinnamon babka, or greens, the prepackaged babka that you can find in lots of places, that will say on it Pas Yisrael, which essentially means Jewish bread, which means it's about this, that only a Jew has been involved in the process of baking that bread or that baked product, that cake product. So there are very traditional Jews who insist on having, and this also applies to dairy products too. It's not mentioned here, but it applies to dairy. So you'll have, I don't think that you can find in the Giant or any other supermarket, unless it's in a very, very Jewish area, a designation called Chalav Yisrael, which means Jewish milk. So this is not just milk, but all dairy products. So those who care very, very traditional Jews who care about that will have to go to Shalom's or Moti's to get Chalav Yisrael milk and dairy products. Though the kosher cheese that you would buy in the kosher section, like the Giant here in Olney has a kosher dairy section. The kosher cheese there, the Millers and Ha'olam, that's Chalav Yisrael. Okay. In its later section, the chapter deals with foods that are prohibited for reasons unrelated to Gentiles and idolatry, because they might include non-kosher ingredients or are themselves non-kosher. The Gemara examines the halachot in cases involving the uncertain status of such foods, the credibility of a Jew who sells them, and the use of distinguishing marks to determine their kashrut. The final Mishnah lists those foods which the sages permitted for consumption despite the existence of possible reasons to prohibit them. Post-Talmudic rabbis have found the passages in this chapter troublesome when taken at face value and have explained their ramifications with regard to the assessment of Gentiles in various manners. One opinion is that of Rabbi Menachem HaMeiri, who claims that the Talmudic sages were referring to pagans who lacked moral and ethical restrictions and who had persecuted Jews mercilessly. He asserts that by his time, all of humanity had been exposed to the moral and ethical teachings of the major religions and were disciplined by these norms. Consequently, such prescriptions are not applicable to contemporary Gentiles. This opinion has been endorsed by a number of later rabbinic authorities, including Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, who was the chief rabbi of British Mandate Palestine 100 years ago, Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, and Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg. These are all important modern Orthodox halachic authorities who claim, based on the Meiri, who was from the Middle Ages, that we're living in a different time. So I'm sure the notes that we'll see in this chapter will refer to their opinions. So let's take a look at the first Mishnah, and then we'll stop there for today. One may not keep an animal in the inns of Gentiles because they are suspected of bestiality. So we're getting right into it, into XXX rated kind of material, right? So you have you're traveling, and you're traveling with your horse, and you're staying. The only option to stay overnight is a non-Jewish inn. The question is, do you leave your horse there? Because they're suspected of what will happen to your horse, what these non-Jews will do with your horse. Since even Gentiles are prohibited from engaging in bestiality, a Jew who places his animal there is guilty of violating the prohibition, you shall not put a stumbling block before the blind. All right, so that you don't want, even though they know they have a prohibition to it, doesn't mean that they're going to not do it. So by bringing your animal there, you're leading them to possibly transgressing even their law, and leading someone to transgression is what this means. You should not put a stumbling block before the blind. You can't tempt someone to transgress. That's how that verse is interpreted. And a woman may not seclude herself with Gentiles because they are suspected of engaging in forbidden sexual relations. And any person may not seclude himself with Gentiles because they are suspected of bloodshed. So this is pretty restrictive, and saying, wait, let's just see. Okay, now let's just take a look at the background here, and then we'll stop for today. As stated in the introduction to this chapter, the sages throughout the generations were troubled by this Mishnah and have explained its implications with regard to Gentiles in various ways. One explanation is that of the Meiri, who explains that the sages in the Talmud were referring to pagans whose way of life was completely lacking in ethical or moral constraints, and who for many centuries cruelly persecuted and murdered the Jews. The Meiri claims that by his time in the 13th century, all of humanity had adopted the moral and ethical codes of the major monotheistic religions. And that's religions. That's amazing. In the 13th century, that's post-Crusades. To say that people, these rampaging crusaders who butchered Jews on the way to the Holy Land, and he's saying that now people have risen above all of their backward ways and people are moral and ethical. It's pretty progressive for the Meiri to say that. Therefore, statements like the one in the Mishnah do not apply to contemporary Gentiles. This explanation, repeated throughout his voluminous works, was adopted by many later authorities, including several 20th century rabbinic luminaries, among them Abraham Isaac Cook, Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, and Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg. Again, we'll get to more of these comments as we go on. So we will stop here for today, and we'll continue next Sunday. So have a good rest of the day, everybody, and we pray for peace in Israel.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.